Okay, cloud recording has been started, so we should have all of our 5 recording channels happening. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, any questions?
Nope.
Okay, so I'll wait for Ryan's cue, because once I start the webinar, basically it opens the door. We should allow a couple of second or a minute maybe for everybody to kind of pile into the session. So I'd rather start that webinar now so we can move forward and get people in.
And Ryan, I'll kick off and I'll just do the quick introduction, give the background and so forth. So
let's let the room fill in a little bit, Rob. So I'm going to start
Yes.
the webinar. Is everybody cool with that?
Yeah.
Yep. Good to go.
Good to go.
We are going live. Webinar has started and attendees are now piling in, which is good. All right. Excellent. I'm seeing dozens and yeah, this is good. Okay, Rob, the session is now yours. I will mute my mic and I ask everybody else to mute their microphones, except for the people interpreting, of course.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rob Lee. I'm the Chief Curriculum Director here at the SANS Institute. I would like to welcome you to the webcast today. It's with great pleasure that we've been able to get Ryan Chapman. Ryan is a incredible expert in ransomware, and the session today is going to really cover some amazing ways that when ransomware is affecting organizations, what you should consider, the way you think about it, and so forth. I've been at SANS for almost 20 years, and one of the things that I really have loved about SANS is the fact that we've been able to continue pushing the edge on the latest threats in education in the information security community. When I first started at SANS, I was working with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. One of my chief duties was to track hackers that were hacking Air Force and Army installations around the world. My skills that I developed, because there was no training, there was no way for me to go to a classroom to learn how to do it, was self-taught in many cases. But today, organizations cannot depend on someone just taking it on themselves to say, well, I guess I'll figure it out. The threats are too complex, the technologies are too complex, and the impacts to the organizations overall are way too complex. The SANS Institute, with our courses, free content, and capabilities, really strive to educate organizations around the world on how to deal daily with these threats that you might encounter. Part of the way that we do that is finding and discussing this with the top minds in the information security industry. The way we find them is through our summits, through the information security community, and we invite a lot of them to become SANS instructors. That's what Ryan Chapman's currently doing. He's in our instructor path, and he's also writing a brand new course for us, Forensics 528, all based on how organizations will encounter and deal with ransomware. And no organization is immune to this. Every individual out there is potentially dealing with this on a weekly basis. And everyone should be asking the questions to their information security staff and to each other. If we actually get hit with ransomware, what should we do? Folks like Ryan Chapman are here to help you answer some of those questions. So I'm going to turn over to Ryan. I'm glad that you're here with us today and hope you enjoy today's webcast.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rob, very much as usual for the intro. And hello, everyone, and welcome. I am very excited to be here. This is fantastic, having this live translated into so many cool languages. I will try to slow down my speech pattern because I get really excited about ransomware and I just start running my mouth. So I'm going to make sure that we give the translators ample opportunity to do their job. So let's get to it. All right, a little bit about me, just real quickly here. I am a principal incident response consultant with BlackBerry Security Services. So basically, the panic button when an organization, hopefully not yours, gets hit with ransomware or other, attacks. We come in and we handle the incidents. We really don't want you to have to deal with ransomware, but groups like us are out there, in case you do. I'm also authoring the current ransomware course for SANS, and I do want to mention here that my course is specifically labeled Ransomware for Incident Responders. And the idea of the course is you are responding to ransomware, like you have been hit by ransomware. What do you do, right? There's a bunch of things for deterrence and things of, hunting operators in the environment, but the core thing is like, what do you actually do? Today, my focus is a little more on how to try to, notice I said try to, it's very difficult to avoid it outright. It's become ubiquitous and it's in our daily environments. It's everywhere, right? We don't want you to have to deal with it. So I'm going to focus on tips and tricks that you can implement now, right now, within your organizations to try to keep it away from you. Like, we don't want ransomware, go away. So let's get to it. All right, here's the agenda for today. I'm going to start off just basically talking about, what is it when we say ransomware? And a lot of people think that ransomware is this mysterious, unknown entity, and that is not the case at all. In fact, it is very well known, and the attacks are very, very well documented for the most part, but information is not necessarily readily available, hence, us creating a course for SANS and things of that nature. I want everyone to understand what truly happens when ransomware hits. What's really happening, right? We're going to discuss that. And then how can you prevent ransomware? Let's try to prevent it, right? Let's do our darndest to make it so at least increase the cost, if you will, to the adversary to get into your organization. You don't want to make it easy for them, right? And then we're going to talk about detecting operators once they're in your environment. One of the good things about being well-tooled and well-equipped and having the right knowledge about how ransomware attacks truly work, is that they take time. Sometimes you'll see an attack that occurs over a matter of hours, but many times it's multiple days, if not weeks, that a threat actor is in the environment. So I will often say threat actor, or I'll just say TA, or I'll sometimes say an operator, a ransomware operator. All those refer to the bad guys and gals doing the bad ransomware stuff, right? So the threat actors, once they're in your environment, the good thing for all of us is that they are noisy. They're really loud. They don't sneak in and use lock picks and use glass cutters and try to sneak into your building. No. They kick the doors in and then they scream to their buddies, "We're in!" And they go nuts. So our job is to try to get you your environment tuned to identify the shenanigans, if you will. And then we're going to talk about what happens, let's say you're being hit right now with ransomware. What do you do? Like, what are your key items to focus on? So let's do it. Ransomware is everywhere. It is oftentimes opportunistic. Many people think that ransomware operators are always targeting high-value targets. It's not exactly correct. And I'll talk about when we get into how do they even get in to your environment. And again, they are loud. Look, I even wrote it right here. Look at the word loud. They are loud. So if you don't have, sensors in your environment, then you may not necessarily hear them, even though they are being technically loud. So the more visibility you have into your environment, the better off you are to identify them. And the big thing is that while Rob mentioned that attacks are getting more and more and more sophisticated, the fun thing about ransomware is that it's not rocket science. It's actually very easy to comprehend how it works once you learn about it. And once you start looking for the telltale signs of ransomware, it's not difficult for organizations who have put the time in, who have tuned their alerting systems and have the right people at the helm to determine and to say, that's a ransomware operator in our environment. Let's get them out. Let's talk about how common ransomware is, right? How common is ransomware? I could give you statistics. There are a number of organizations out there who have stats that show how many countries are being affected, what type of verticals or what type of markets, all these kinds of things. I'm going to show you a visual example right here on the screen. This is a screenshot from a range that I was creating along with the SANS SROC team. They're the team who helps us authors create content for our courses. We had a range of 15 hosts because we're going to have an entire day of hands-on activity, right? A capstone or a CTF, if you will, in our course. But we had a range for testing. And one day, right when we were about to engage in a 3-day-long active engagement to build the data for the class, I logged in to our test range and I found this. The funny thing is, this wasn't us. This was not our team. This was actually our range that had just been ransomware. So keep in mind, I am writing a course on dealing with ransomware and our range was ransomed. I don't know if it gets more like hilarious / ironic really than that. Now, unfortunately for the threat actors in this case, what they didn't realize is that the environment they had just broken into was probably one of the best well-tooled environments out there, because we had set up everything under the sun because we're trying to identify all the activity so that we could present it in the course. So this is how common ransomware is. You can be writing a course on how to deal with ransomware and have to deal with ransomware while doing so. I think that's hilarious. So I just want to share that with everyone. So ransomware has evolved. It started out essentially as a threat that you would worry about on a per host or a per user kind of basis. These days, ever since around 2015, around there, we've experienced two primary big changes to ransomware. One of them was the implementation of human-operated ransomware. I call it humor. Now, the problem with this is that before you would have a user who say maybe clicked on something silly, as I call it a silly click. You may have a user who received a shipping notice for something they didn't purchase, and they went, oh, okay. And they clicked the link and then oops. In those cases, previous to 2014, 15, that one computer may be quote unquote locked, right? The crypto locker, crypto wall, those were very popular around that time frame. That one host would be compromised. And then over time, they started adding somewhat like worm components to the ransomware. Humor, or humans at the keyboard, is exactly what it sounds like. Threat actors break into an environment and then they spread as much as they possibly can via lateral movement. They escalate credentials. They dump all the credentials in the environment they possibly can. They escalate their privileges, and then they get to, and typically it's a Windows-based environment, and typically it's run by Active Directory. And thus you have your domain controllers, your primaries, your secondaries. They get a hold of those. And then once they're there, think about it. In a Windows domain environment, most computers have to be able to speak to the domain controller, right? So once you get access to the domain controller, they can then spread the malware out throughout the entire environment. At least that is the idea. So that caused a problem. But what really caused things to blow up was the creation of ransomware as a service. Ransomware as a service took it even further. And the idea is that a core team of developers can develop the actual ransomware. And then what's known as now, we call them affiliates, can basically lease the ransomware and then split the profits. So if I'm an affiliate, if I am a hacker or a threat actor, right, and I want to implement ransomware in an environment and make a lot of money in doing so and cripple businesses worldwide, I don't have to know how to write ransomware at all. All I have to do is go to one of these very common and well-known dark web forums and just pop on there and say, hey, I'd like to be an affiliate. And this is basically how this works. This image comes from Kivu Consulting. So some credit where it's due from the folks at Kivu who made this nice graphic. But basically the developers of the ransomware, they usually pocket 10 to 30%, but they bring on what are known as affiliates. The affiliates are the ones who basically do most of the work. In fact, they typically do quote unquote all the work outside of developing the actual ransomware binary itself. They can be formed of many different types of entities, one of which that's extremely important for us to understand is the intrusion access brokers, or IABs. These are groups or individuals who specialize in getting into your environment, right? Getting into all of our environments. They get in, and then oftentimes they will either sell, sometimes even lease, and sometimes the way they'll get in is just to purchase access from another intrusion access broker, or initial access broker, And they will then hand the work off to what's known as a pen tester. Essentially, it works like this. If I'm a malware author, I create the malware, and then I lease it out to an affiliate. The affiliate gets an initial or intrusion access broker, or an IAB, on board, and they get into a bunch of locations. They hand off access to the pen testers. The pen tester's job is to take that one or maybe multiple compromised device and to then move laterally to own the environment. Once they own the environment, they then spread the ransomware throughout. The affiliates also include things like negotiators and money mules, and it's a huge business model. And it's very, very successful, hence the reason that we see ransomware attacks so often. This is an example of a group called Conti, and this is from one of the, here you go, forums called Raid Forums up here at the top. And this is basically a leak that occurred without going into too much detail. Conti is one of the larger ransomware operations out there, crews, if you will. And they had a disgruntled affiliate, and the affiliate decided to leak their playbook. And their playbook was then translated into various languages. And when you look at the playbook, it really gives you a feel as to why it is so easy to get into organizations. And you'll notice if you actually, I'll zoom back in here. It's a little blurry and zoom back out. But if you look here, you'll see the first thing that they have in here, right? Topics in this manual: configure the rclone software with Mega for data exfiltration. Mega is a very common cloud sharing site. And basically this manual shows you how to steal data using a very well-known software mechanism called rclone. You can Google it right now and go find it and download it for free, right? And Mega is, just think of like Box or Google Drive or Microsoft Blobs or whatever, but think of a particular group whose terms of service are a little more lenient, if you will. That's just one example of the kind of thing that's in this documentation. The Conti group was providing and is providing this type of documentation to its affiliates and basically saying, okay, I make the ransomware. If you want to get into organizations and deploy the ransomware, and then we all make money together, just read this little book, just read this little manual. And the manual has attacks that many of you who have any type of red teaming or pen testing experience would say, yeah, that's the kind of stuff we learned in like week 1 of, of hacker school. It's not super complicated stuff. So I just want to show you that they not just provide the ransomware binary itself, the actual .exe malware that runs at the very end, but rather they give instructions for how to get it into environments. The intrusion access brokers, sometimes called initial access brokers, what they can also do is buy and sell access to organizations. Some IABs work directly with the ransomware groups and their affiliates. Others, their whole thing is just, I'm going to break into networks and then I'm going to sell the access. So on the quote unquote dark web, which is, just connecting to a Tor circuit, that's all that is. You can hit up many different marketplaces. One of them is this guy, Marketo or Marketo. I'm not sure how it's pronounced actually, but here's a screenshot of the site right here. And this site is all about going and finding businesses that you can buy access to. Typically, they will have their credentials stolen. Oftentimes, it will be simple phishing exercises where, well, not exercises, they'll be real, but users clicked and gave out their username and password, and then they realized, oh, their VPNs are not multi-factor. We now have access to this environment, things of that nature. Detection for this can be very difficult, meaning if you get hit with ransomware, let's say you get hit with ransomware tomorrow. Let's not say that. Don't do that. Don't get hit with ransomware tomorrow. Let's just say someone got hit with ransomware and they noticed that the entry vector was their VPN, but there were no failures, or maybe there was like one failure and then a bunch of successful account logins, right? And you're sitting there thinking, how the heck did they know the password? We're not seeing password failures from different IPs going back months in our log aggregator. How'd they even get in? They could have just purchased the credentials. There are groups out there who provide what's known as dark web intelligence, My favorite personally is, or an example I should at least say, but I love them, is Intel 471. There's other groups out there. One of them is Digital Shadows. And you go to those types of groups, and what they do is they aggregate all the different types of marketplaces and all the different forums. And then you can go and look for your company name and be like, oh, our credentials were up for sale, right? If you don't have that type of system, it's very difficult to determine how did they actually get those credentials. Ransomware evolved further, moving from the simple, we are going to own your environment, right? Not just a single host, but your entire environment through either a single or usually a team of people with their hands on a keyboard or set of keyboards, to what's known as double and then further triple extortion. The team that made this very, very popular was known as Maze. They were later known as the Egregor team, and they're evolving probably as we speak now. So there was a press release. They started putting out these press releases. And if you really want to get into the mind of a ransomware operator, when I say operator, I mean the actual core developers of the ransomware itself, right? If you just read some of their press releases, it's mind-boggling, the kind of things that they say. If you look at this part right here, negotiations mean the dialogue and finding the best solution for both parties. If the client is too shy or scared or just can't negotiate, this is exclusively the client's problem. We are not psychologists to understand the client and analyze its behavior patterns. What? They're basically saying, yeah, we're going to steal all of your data, right? Not all of it. We're going to steal a ton of your data. In addition to locking down your environment, that's the first stage of extortion. But the second stage was they started stealing out your information using tools like ArcClone and uploading it to sites like Mega. And then they were holding that over your head. And they even have the audacity to say things like, look, this is basically saying, if you're too scared or if you're too, mind my language here, but if you're too stupid to negotiate with us, sucks for you. Like, that's crazy. Like, seriously? That's horrible. The triple extortion then came out. I first heard about it in like early 2021, but I think it was happening even before that from teams like Maze. Not only would they hold your environment, your hosts, and thus your network over your head, and not only were they threatening to release your data, but then they were starting to threaten to contact all of your vendors and any type of governing bodies, or basically if you're trying to get a hold of the situation, you're trying to handle it with your public relations team and your HR and all of your legal and compliance and things like that. They're saying like, look, you don't have time for that. We're going to give you 3 days in this example here. And sorry, sucks for you. If you don't contact us within a total of 10 days, their next press release said, we're going to release everything and not just let you know about it. Let everyone who does business with you know about it. That's rude. And then another team that's out there right now is called Grief, because they believe that they cause grief to organizations, which they absolutely do. And this particular team put out another press release or article. This was a couple months ago, and it was called Worse Than We Are. And they claim that a recovery program. So if you get hit with ransomware, you often have to have a response team, like maybe mine at BlackBerry or their CrowdStrike. There's all kinds of other companies out there that do what we do, right? But typically, you also need to have a negotiation company if you plan to pay the ransom, and sometimes even if you don't plan to pay it, to buy you some time. This press release here is basically, don't worry about reading the screen. I know there's a lot of words here, but they're basically saying that the recovery companies, the negotiation companies, are crooks, and they're making money off of your misfortune, which, by the way, is exactly what the Grief ransomware company is doing to you, right? Duh. And they're saying that if they identify activity in your environment, that you're working with a recovery company, that they are going to publish all your data and just never work with you and just leak everything out. So that's pretty horrible. They're basically saying you can't even go out and try to get help. You can't get assistance. And so they're trying to tighten the noose further and further. And that's just horrible. Here's an example of affiliate recruiting. Not only are affiliates welcomed to basically say, hey, come to us. We're ransomware group, blah, blah, blah. We have a great product. Come lease it from us and we'll both make money together. Oh, no. They have active recruiting campaigns. So here's a recruiting campaign from a group known as Lockbit. Lockbit went away for a bit and came back as Lockbit 2.0. And they actually have on their data leak site conditions for partners. So these partners would be the affiliates, by the way. So check this out. They have like a sales pitch, and they're saying that our ransomware is fantastic. We have all these amazing features that are part of our ransomware. Come and do business with us, because as I mentioned, it's a business model, but at this point, it's a massive competition. Lockbit doesn't want you to work with Egregor, and they don't want you to work with Grief, because then they don't make the money, right? Meanwhile, the affiliates, the ones who do most of the damage, most of them are not beholden to a particular ransomware group. They will actually be working with multiple at a given time, or they will just go from one to the other, because their goal is to just push ransomware. So they don't really care too much about it all. There's a question that came up real quick here asking about Apple systems being targeted and easily accessed. It's not as common, but it is possible. We're seeing a lot of environments that are still primarily Windows based, but yet have a decent contingency of Apple systems that, yes, they will get hit. And a lot of that is a problem for the organizations who do run those Macintosh computers, because most of them, their security teams are not as experienced with Macintosh digital forensics. Many of them don't even know what a plist is. And they're like, I don't know how to find that information. So they will often be swept up in these general ransomware attacks. How does ransomware get into your environment? The three answers are on the screen right here. We see these three things over and over and over. It's almost always one of these three things. The first one is remote desktop protocol. Many times our clients and other clients of our competitors, whatever you want to call them, will say, well, they could not have gotten in via remote desktop protocol because we don't have RDP exposed to the internet. Yeah, you do. you obviously do, because that's how they got in. It seems kind of silly. The word I like to use is daffy. It seems like that's daffy, right? Why would you have, a domain controller with internet access with RDP enabled, right? Especially with like no lockout for failed authentication attempts. Like that would be ridiculous, right? That is a bunch of cases. You'll see that being the infection vector. Phishing is also very, very common. Phishing can be usually in two different ways. One is via credential harvesting, where, the phishing is simply asking for usernames and passwords, right? They'll send you to a page that looks just like a login page, maybe for like a Microsoft Exchange Online or something like that. And then the users will put their password in. They can even redirect them to the real site login after that. And the user just thinks, oh gosh, I must have put the wrong password in. They put it in again. They log into the real site. Lo and behold, not even realizing that they just lost their credentials. They've been exposed. But also, phishing can have attachments. Many times we're seeing attachments that are Microsoft Office documents. I actually began my journey with SANS, if you will, as an instructor teaching Forensics 610, reverse engineering malware. And on day 3 of 610, we covered the entire day. We talk about document files or malicious documents, and we see those in ransomware all the time. What we call a weaponized Microsoft Excel file, for example. Someone opens up the file, they click enable macros, and then all the bad stuff happens, right? And then down here at the bottom, we have software vulnerabilities. Now, many times people use the term 0 days in association with ransomware attacks. That is not the reality. It is very, well, I wouldn't say very, but it is fairly rare for a 0 day to be involved in a ransomware attack. Now, some of you are going like, what about Kaseya? Okay, compare that to all the other ransomware attacks. It's not very common to actually have a 0 day. And for that matter, the software vulns that we see, and I'll show you a great example from a fellow named Alan Liska. Hey man, hope you see this someday. He does great work on ransomware research. He put together a list of vulnerabilities that we're often seeing being abused by ransomware affiliates. And I'm going to say, I say about 5 to 6 years ago, but this, I just like the phrase a paradigm shift. I think it's fun to say that. It makes you sound smart. I just like it. But there was a time when the threat actor would make actual malware and actual software and write a bunch of scripts manually to get into your environment, once they got into your environment, for post-exploitation, as we call it. But over time, that has changed. And over time, what we rather see is we see the threat actors using very well-known red teaming tools. So each of these are clickable, and I believe I'll give a final PDF, by the way, as soon as we're done with this, because I updated it right before we started again. Sorry, folks. These are all clickable. If you're wondering, like, what's Bloodhound? What is that? Click it. That's Bloodhound. It's on GitHub. It's free. It's open source, right? If you're like, what's Posh C2? Click it. There it is. These threat actors are using tools that are widely available, and you can just find them, for free on the internet and the source code to go along with them. One of the problems that we get into here is when they use the living off the land binary and scripts, which is just a term that's been provided to refer often to Microsoft and similar signed software that threat actors will utilize within your environment. A great example is PS exec. So if I go look up PS exec, I Google it, the first thing I find is a download from Microsoft, right? It's from Rusinovich's PS Tools, or the old sysinternals team. It's a free tool. Its purpose is to allow you to run software remotely in a Windows environment. That's what it does. It's not malware per se, and thus we often call it a dual use tool. We call it dual use, see right there, because administrators can use it legitimately, but there's another use to it, and that's to be used very, very illegitimately by the threat actors. A great example of that also is what's known as Cobalt Strike. Cobalt Strike, which shows up here on the next slide. And before I even go there, let me just show you. If you're not familiar, Cobalt Strike is, there's different numbers here and there, but at one point it was associated with, from at least one source, 70% of all ransomware campaigns. Cobalt Strike is an emulation or adversary simulation and emulation software. And basically what it allows you to do is for red teams and simulation teams to simulate, to act as though they are a threat actor. And it basically, the reason that they use this cute little graphic here, see this little guy right there, like the Minority Report, if you've ever seen that movie, I think it was a Tom Cruise movie, I believe, at least in the US. It's visual. You just click on things, and it's a graphical user interface, very, very easy to learn how to use. And this tool is used so often by threat actors. And while it is commercial, you have to pay for it. Here's an example of the software being cracked and sold and sometimes provided for free on quote unquote the dark web. This is one of the common forums, and there were just different versions of Cobalt Strike that was being provided to whomever wanted to go download it. So there are issues with the Cobalt Strike detections because a lot of folks aren't looking for it. And a lot of people say you should be looking for the activity and not the tool. For me, I recommend both. I recommend looking for things tools like Cobalt Strike can do and tools like Posh C2 can do. But I also recommend literally looking for the actual program or signs of it in your environment. Because if you find them and you're not doing your own penetration testing and you're not paying a team to do it for you, someone is, someone's using it illegitimately. So let's walk through a ransomware attack, just an example attack, and then get into how to prevent this stuff. All right. What happens? There is a website called the DFIR Report. I absolutely love this website. They actually have what's called a Patreon account, and you can give them money. Basically, you can support their efforts. So I think I pay them $30 a month or something. I give money. I'm like, you're awesome. Keep doing what you're doing. If you think about it, ransomware attacks are very common, and we can get information about ransomware attacks here and there, but it's very difficult most of the time for someone like me to write a full report and provide it to the public. I can't do that. I'm bound by NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. For most, almost, well, not most, every single case that I run, all consultants pretty much are. If you're not, that's crazy, right? And most groups don't want their host names and their usernames. They don't want all this stuff leaked out. So what the DFIR report folks do is they set up a lab environment and then they just wait for it to get hit. And when it does, they can report on everything. And it's awesome. This is an article from March of this year about the Revil crew, also known as Sodnikidi. And there's all kinds of information. You can see how long this page is. You can see that in this case, the threat actor got in using a weaponized Excel document, just like we talked about, right? We cover that in 610. We cover how to analyze those thoroughly. And once they got in, once the document macros ran, it downloaded a Trojan called IcedID. IcedID is ridiculously common. Before IcedID, I think they're the king of the roost right now. Before that, there was one called Imitet that was known by many people as the world's most dangerous malware. It was taken down by a number of government agencies, and now it has just come back. Like literally, you'll see these are from 1 day ago. So yesterday, we started seeing some, well, about 3 or 4 days ago, some of us in the consulting field started seeing signs of Imitet coming back. And we're like, oh no, don't come back. The reason it sucks when it comes back is because IcedID and Imitet are malware as a service. So remember how ransomware itself is ransomware as a service now, right? I go to the Conti crew and say, hey, I want to be an affiliate. And they say, here's the stuff, you have to get it into an environment. So if I was an affiliate, I could then say, okay, and I could go over to the IcedID team, generally same forums to be honest, and say, hey, I'd like to lease IcedID, and I would like you to create custom droppers for me. Many times, I don't even have to write any code to do this, like actual, C# kind of code. I don't have to compile software. I just make some scripts. Basically, I'm a script kiddie at that point. And I rip off scripts from all the other affiliates because that's what they do. They steal each other's scripts all the time. So I get a copy of IcedID that is controlled by a backend that I get leased. And then I get these documents, and then my job is just to send them to people, right? I see someone in the chat right now, Vincent Zangari. I'm going to send these over to you, man. Hey, Vince, how's it going? You just start sending them out in bulk. And once those things hit inboxes, someone is going to click it, hopefully not in your environment. But once you get something like IcedID or Imitet into your environment, oftentimes right after that, guess what follows? Cobalt Strike. And then as soon as Cobalt Strike is in the environment, it's pretty much game over at that point. It's a matter of hours or days, depending on how much they want to steal from you before they ransom your environment. So let's go through on this DFIR. I didn't mean to close it. Let's go back. There's an image on this particular article. Give me a moment to scroll for it. There it is. And let's just quickly go through an example Revil attack. All right. This all occurs in the matter of 1 day, a number of hours in this particular example. Okay. In this case, at basically 6:05 UTC, right, in the PM, IcedID is executed on a host. How did that happen? It probably came in via an email. Technically, it probably came in via a download from a weaponized docx file or docm, excuse me, or an XLSM or an XLS or something file. So one user allowed IcedID to run in that environment. A minute later, IcedID started to discover on the host, identify the users, administrators, things of that nature, right? And then we've got not even an hour and a half later, we have Cobalt Strike all of a sudden is running. Why? Because the malware that gets leased out, like IcedID and Imitet and Hanseter was gone for like 4 years. It just went away. That's also back for the past year now. So these malware as a service folks, they make their money too. All of a sudden we have got Cobalt Strike in the environment. 9 minutes later, Cobalt Strike is used to get to the Exchange server. And then not even, 23 minutes later, lateral movement from the Exchange server to the domain controller. Now the threat actor is on the domain controller in less than 4 hours. Then they start moving around via RDP, remote desktop protocol. So they're internal, but they're using RDP now internally. And then they begin to exfiltrate data. How? They use rclone, R-C-L-O-N-E, rclone.org. Here it is. Here's the tool. It's nothing secret. It's nothing special. Actually, it's pretty cool. If you use it for the right purposes, it's pretty cool. But it's if you see it in your environment and you didn't approve its use, you've got a problem and you need to act now. So anywho, rclone starts to run, and then they start to see bits admin. Many times when rclone is run in an environment, it won't even be renamed. It'll be like rclone.exe, rclone.config for the config file. Bits admin is the background intelligent transfer service by Microsoft. It's used for many things in the background of Windows, like updates and things of that nature. They use that to actually deploy the ransomware. The ransomware runs in the environment, and then within a matter of, 6 to 10, not even 5 hours, the environment has had data stolen from it and been ransomed. This is a smash job. It's just bang, take data out, encrypt it, get out. And now everything that you have is in flux, and your whole world is just sad for the next who knows how long, right? How did it all start? A single user launched ICE ID. How? Via phishing. Phishing training is critically important for all aspects of security, but very much so ransomware. This is an example from a fellow named Alan Liska. I mentioned his name earlier, and I actually have embedded a link in his little image here. This is from his Twitter account. I highly recommend everyone follows him on Twitter. But if you click it, when you get the PDF here, he's just released a new book on ransomware. When I say just released, I mean October 28th. In fact, I didn't plan this, but I have his old book right here. Did you know there's books on ransomware? I got one right here. I don't make money off of his book, by the way. I know I'm like, buy his book. I'm not trying to sell you his book so much as just show you that it's out there, because I didn't even know it was. But he's got a brand new text on ransomware, and he's a great guy. I highly recommend you check it out. He put this together. I want to go over this for a couple minutes before we get to the prevention stuff in the last 15 minutes or so. So how does ransomware get in? Well, a common way is phishing, right? You can also have credential stuffing or reuse via remote desktop protocol. That is when you have, for example, a credential leak, and then those usernames and passwords are just attempted to be used via RDP. You also have general exploitation. Now, keep in mind, the general exploitation of the software vulnerabilities are typically not zero-day. They are typically vulnerabilities that you should have patched. And some of them may have been, patches that were out for a couple months or a couple years for that matter. It's very easy to scan services that are listening on the internet and say like, hey, that's not patched, and just get into the environment. It's something that's just sitting up on Metasploit's, GitHub page. So there may be a web shell that's added for remote access, and there are various entry points like your VPN services. Needless to say, but not needless to say, because we see this all the time in our line of work, any entry point into your environment should be MFA'd. You should have multi-factor enabled, and I'll talk about that going forward. But you then see these types of tools, right? Cobalt Strike and PS Exec. I've already talked about those. Those are right there in his graph. WMIC is something that's very, very common. It's just part of the Windows management and instrumentals, right? So that's used. Tools like AD Find are super common. You can just go type in AD Find, and you'll find a posting from like 5 years ago, and you'll be like, this tool, this like silly looking old tool, yes, it is used in a ton of cases. Bloodhound, I showed you a link on that. Look at this slide, study it, go follow Alan. If you're not familiar with any of these tools, research them. Here's a good example of some of this kind of stuff and why it's important you understand how they work on the individual basis. Here's a tool called SteelBit. See this guy right here? Here, I'll zoom in for you. This guy, SteelBit. The Lockbit ransomware crew was bragging that they had a tool called SteelBit that they were providing along with, when you release their ransomware, and they said it steals data faster than other tools like rclone, right? To steal out your data. And I thought to myself, how do you transfer data over the network faster? Like, what do you mean faster? And what does it do? So I looked into it. StealBit uses HTTP put. Does anyone here have anything in your environment that uses HTTP put? I'm not saying FTP put. I'm saying HTTP put. When you look through your HTTP traffic, you have get, post, maybe some head, and you'll have connects for your SSL traffic, right? It's rare that you see HTTP put, and yet StealBit uses it almost exclusively. So go check your logs. Do you have Splunk? Do you have Elasticsearch? Just go check your HTTP logs. Look for the HTTP verb called put. And if you have it, find out what that is, because you don't want it to be StealBit. But the more you start to research the types of tools that they use so commonly, you start to come up with these kind of obvious ways to find these things. So I really, really like this slide. It shows a lot of the tools they use for reconnaissance, and there's a lot of stuff that they use for exfiltration. Here's MegaSync. Mega has its own tool called MegaSync that will actually sync data up to Mega. Many times, here's two more important things for you. Many times, these threat actors will not rename these tools at all. They will be called adfind.exe. Like, no freaking different. In fact, and it's not super evident here, but you can see that I meant to make that one also. But these two guys up here are actually links. And if you click on the names of some of these EXEs, it links to this. Now, this may not have been the best thing, but I threw it in right before the talk. There is in the PE header of Windows executables, there is an item called original file name. It can be changed, but often is not changed by threat actors. If I'm a threat actor and I have adfind.exe and I change the name of that to Windows critical update.exe or something silly, and I run that in your environment, if you have an EDR, like I work for BlackBerry, we make optics. If you have optics, awesome. If you have one of our competitors, awesome. I just want you to have an EDR, okay? Also, if you have Windows Sysmon, this article that I just linked to shows you that in these Sysmon events, it shows you the original file name. And you can actually set rules, and you can say things like, if the name of the executable is not adfind.exe, but the original file name is adfind.exe, I want to know about it. If you alert on those types of things, you're looking specifically for well-known tools that have just been renamed. And those can be fantastic hunts. And there was a question from someone about getting a copy of the ransomware sheet. Yeah, you'll get a copy in the PDF. If this is the PDF itself, so you'll have it. The groups, before they deploy the ransomware itself, will try to delete your backups. They will delete shadow copies in Windows. If you have on-premises backup servers, you have to be very, very, very careful, because they will often encrypt those. And then what are you going to do for your backup, right? And then eventually they start pushing out the ransomware itself. And then they can sell your data, they can release your data, all kinds of stuff. So let's talk about some prevention, okay, for the last 15 minutes or so that we've got here. Again, everyone's going to have access to all this. So I'm going to give out a PDF, and I'm going to give it to the SANS folks, and they're going to put it somewhere, I assume on the webcast landing page. First up, for phishing, multi-factor access. If a phishing email comes in and one of your users does a silly click, like I call it, right? And they go boop, and they say, oh, I better log into FedEx, or excuse me, more worldwide, DHL, or China Post, because I guess I have a package coming, but like they didn't order anything, right? And they put their credentials in. Can those credentials be used to log into your network? Is your VPN MFA? Gosh, I really hope it is. If it's not, that's like one of the #1 things you need to go fix. Your email system, is that MFA? Also, the applications you have available that are just externally accessible, whether you're running them on-prem, whether they're cloud-based, whatever it is, are those MFA? If they're not, you really want to work on that. Security awareness and user training, along with phishing testing, for obvious reasons, is just critical. But the best training in the world is not going to stop one person eventually from doing something silly. And your email security gateway, do you have one? I hope you do. Do you have a proof point? Do you use Microsoft's, built-in for Exchange Online? Do you have something, Barracuda systems, whatever it is, put something in front of your email and filter out as much bad stuff as you can. Look into DMARC, DKIM, and SPF, the Sender Policy Framework. Anyone here who works in hands-on IT and has ever dealt with any of those three acronyms, right now you probably went, oh, come on, Ryan. Those are a pain. Those are a pain in the rear to deal with, okay? But once you get them set up, they can save your bacon. And attachments. I released a document, and you can click here and go to it. And there is a block list. These are all file types that I personally recommend that you block. So there's an entire list of them, like BAT files. Should BAT files be allowed to be emailed into your environment? No. Did you know that an ISO file can be sent in, a disk image, to your users as an attachment? They can double click it. Windows will open it. Looks just like a folder. And then there can be something like a JavaScript file in there, a JS file, or they can just attach a JS file. Did you know in Windows, if you double click a JavaScript file, did you know that the Windows scripting host will execute it? It's actually called JScript. It's a derivative of EMCAH scripting, and Windows just runs it natively. So be careful for JavaScript. All these different files here, if you're not blocking these file types, I recommend you do. So this is my list. If you want to contribute to it, you can actually contact me and I can add stuff to it. I say we try to build that out as much as we can. And one of the biggest things to prevent phishing from being successful, don't let your users be administrators on their machines. At the very least, look into something like Beyond Trust or something that will require them to put their credentials in like manually again in order to do administrative functions and things of that nature. Because if malware can run easily via phishing, and as soon as it runs, if it's already an administrator on that machine, it is trivial to bypass user account control and then just take over the machine. If you have a VPN and if you have remote users, and many of us have at this point remote users and workers, right? I work full-time from home. This is my office. That's why I have all the weird lights and paint on the wall, because it's my office. Make sure that you are capturing and analyzing as much of your user traffic as possible, okay? Always on VPN. I don't mean Microsoft's always on VPN. I just mean whatever VPN you have, I recommend backhauling as much network activity as you can to your firewalls, because you can have a firewall block list that's just off the charts. But if your users who are working from home, if the traffic that they click on doesn't go back to your firewalls, then they're not being protected at all by them. What's the point of them? If you have the capability for DNS layer protection, you can block things like, newly seen domains. That's one of the ones that Cisco Umbrella has. It's fantastic. Monitor, and if you can, control your scripting, especially PowerShell, in your environment. So I have a link here to talk about monitoring and logging PowerShell, enabling script block logging and module logging. For remote desktop protocol, okay, first off, don't have RDP open to the general internet. It's easy to say that, and it's easy to put it into a policy, but it's more difficult, but you should verify that. Make sure your firewalls are blocking port 3389 ingress and egress. If you're like, well, we have a team who needs to use it, okay, then whitelist it just for them, right? Control access. If you have maybe an intelligent firewall, application aware firewall, like a Palo Alto or Fortinet, then block the application remote desktop protocol, because many times you will have these shadow IT groups, as we call it, at least in English. I'm not sure if that translates well, but shadow IT is when you have groups who do stuff as though they are in IT, but they're not, right? So they may decide, well, I want to use RDP, but I'm just going to move it to port 33389. That way, no threat actors will ever find it. Oh, you're kidding me? The scans that they run, they'll find that easily. So if you can block the actual application, awesome. Go and look in your firewall logs. Go and look in your Windows event logs. Here are just some examples of event codes to look for. There are other ones. These are some common ones. SANS has some great resources on which ones to check, by the way. Look to see if the remote IPs are outside the geographic locations where you do business. If you have RDP trying to come in, but it's not in a place where you do business, like what is that about? You can even disable terminal services via a group policy. And secure password policies are a must. Here are some examples for hunting RDP traffic. If you have the means to do this, this is because these are examples basically from Splunk. But if you have any type of log aggregation tool, ArcSight, if you have Microsoft stuff, whatever it is, if you can search and do things like this, if I look for destination traffic to port 3389, but I do a distinct count by the destination IP by the source IP, and I look for when that destination count is over 1 or 2, what I'm looking at is, are there any IPs out there that are trying to RDP to multiple machines? And if they're trying to RDP to multiple machines, who is that? Is that your IT? Because if it's not, it's someone bad. The example below it, we do a distinct count on target username by IP address. If we have an IP address and it's trying to RDP using a particular admin name, right? Or okay, maybe that's your IT, hopefully. But if you have an RDP connection spree, as I call it, and they're trying to log into 10,000 different names, that's probably an attack. There's also a great rule here in a system called Sigma. I recommend that everyone click this and check this out when you get your hands on it. This is Sigma provides a way to translate a bunch of pre-created searches and queries to whatever system you use. And I recommend you check that out. Software vulnerabilities. Once again, multi-factor, everything, whatever systems you have. Asset management. Many teams say that the worst part of their IT program is asset management, and they don't do it well enough. We hear it all the time. So try to do it better. Software updates. Update your freaking software. It's super important you update your software, but not just your software, but your network appliances. And even more important, I would say, and especially on those network appliances, is the least privilege for these service accounts. Many times we see that, some VPN service was vulnerable. It was compromised. And the account that was on that VPN server was, not a service account with just what it needed to work with Kerberos or something like that, but rather was a domain admin account. As soon as that software was compromised, some examples of compromised vulnerabilities here used by ransomware groups, again, from Alan, I love that guy. As soon as it's compromised, then they have access to your entire domain. So if you have some of the products on this screen, if you have products that are competitors to the products on this screen, and one of those two things you probably have, right? Do you have an antivirus, right? Do you have a firewall, things like that? It's critical that you keep them up to date and that you're on top of your patching program. Again, you'll have access to this so you can see all these numbers. Don't worry about screenshotting it right now. We'll get the PDF out to everyone. There are examples here of how to hunt ransomware operators. And the reason I give you some of these hunting examples is because oftentimes groups don't realize that you shouldn't necessarily have exe files being dropped into program data or directly into syswow64 or to just the user's public folder, users, public, and then some name.exe. What is that? Why is that being created? If you can use these in whatever system you have to hunt for newly created executables in these locations, if you get hits for these, trust me, you're going to want to look at them. And yes, any user profile, the pictures folder, all of a sudden getting a .exe file, that's a huge heads up. You may have a ransomware operator in your environment, or at least just some silly malware. All right, we're almost wrapping it up. I know time, we're getting close here. This I'll leave as a kind of an extra for you. You can set a PIN, and you can also try to use what's known as immutable blob storage. And those will help you to protect your backup systems and mechanisms. Malware that operates and tries to delete your backups. If you have a PIN, the malware doesn't know your PIN, right? So there's some resources here. There's some video links here for some Microsoft stuff because it's so commonly used. I recommend checking that out. And then time-wise, I'm not going to be able to cover this guy, but basically, if you have ransomware running in your environment right now, the big thing to do is look at your backup servers, get them offline. Look at your network mapped shares where people share a bunch of like project documents and all that. Take those down, secure those servers, cut them off from the network. Yes, it'll impact business, but I'll tell you right now, if you let them be encrypted, you're going to really see an impact to your business. And then finally, there's a great article from Microsoft here that I have a link to, and they show you how many threat actors move laterally in the environment, and you can see how to identify them. You want to look for these SMB, WMI, RDP, and this article covers that in a really good way if you haven't seen a lot of it before. And the most important part from this final slide here is if you're going to potentially pay a ransom or not, you need to have that in a policy before you ever get hit with ransomware. So check this slide out. You need to have a policy and a consulting firm. Come check us out at BlackBerry, but have someone that you can call immediately and say, go. I recommend retainers, but of course we sell retainers, so why wouldn't I? Of course I'm going to recommend a retainer, but it's very important that you know who to go to. If you have cyber insurance, you have a call tree, you have their numbers, you can call them up right away. If you want any further resources, these are some of the links to use. There's a ransomware landing page, and there's also some sources that Katie Nichols of SANS and myself put together a couple months back. Highly recommend you check those out. And I think we just made it right at the buzzer for any questions. So I can stay and answer any questions that might have come up. There's only a couple questions that are in the chat right now, but I'll let the SANS folks take it from here and let me know how to proceed.
Hey, Ryan, it's Suresh. I think maybe just roll through the ones in the Q&A. I think there's a good set of 5 or 6 questions there. Why don't we just tackle them in order?
Yep, will do. So one of them was about Apple systems. I have not personally worked a Macintosh specific organization or group that got hit by ransomware, meaning a group that solely uses Macintosh computers. However, those groups are not as common. They're very, very not common actually. But I have done digital forensic analysis on Macintosh hosts that have been accessed and have had data stolen from them during a general ransomware attack. Many times those hosts have networking services that are enabled that allow lateral movement to them. Many times they may be offering services. Sometimes they'll be running even some Unix-based software that may be vulnerable itself. That's usually not the commonality. Usually the commonality is that credentials are dumped. Those credentials then just get used in it. They happen to log in and go, look, oh, it's a Macintosh computer with SMB running. Okay, and they just steal the data from there. They just backhaul it. And many Macs can even have RDP enabled. And many times Windows administrators run RDP on their Macs, and then they could just RDP in after stealing credentials and then go from there. How often have TAs been successful at locking Linux? Parrot, and since I saw Parrot, I knew that was my buddy Vince. It's not as uncommon as you might think that Linux environments get locked. In fact, Conti has a specific version of their ransomware just for ESXi. So not just for Linux in general, but actually for ESXi. Now think about it. You can have an ESXi box that's running like what, 30 servers? 10 servers, you lock that one ESXi box at the host level, and then boom, everything's inaccessible. They will oftentimes also delete the root account, not delete the root accounts, but change the root passwords on like your ESXi boxes. That sucks. Most of the stuff I work with and I respond to in the Linux world involves Bitcoin miners. They're so common. But yeah, we do see Linux environments being locked, and the groups out there are creating their own custom variants just for Linux. Question about Windows 10 shipping with Windows security contains anti-malware. Do you think it's a good way to prevent the attacks, or is Windows? Oh, Microsoft 5 years ago, I was in that camp that would laugh like Microsoft internet, security. Like, come on, they're horrible at it. They're really good at it now. They obviously made a huge push for security in the Microsoft offices, I guess we'll call it. And they're doing a really good job. They have some very, really good programs and systems and tools. Many of them kind of bothers me because they charge for it. But for example, if you have like Exchange Online, you know, your E3 versus your E5 licenses, E5 will get you a lot more protection. And if you're just looking at on the Windows side, there have been many cases where I have actually gone into an environment and the AV the client had, I won't say names, whatever it was, failed to catch certain tools the threat actor was using, but Windows Defender did catch it. So I like Defender. If you have an AV and you can keep Defender on also, if you can deal with, you know, tuning that and making that work, I actually recommend that. They're getting a lot better. And can you use this for a CISA CPE? I'll leave that up to SANS because I'm not sure. Where can we find resources for Sysmon? Help detect non-original file names. For Sysmon to non-file names, it's actually in here. There's that link that I have. So I will make the link. I'll make this PDF more available, but on the slide where Alan is showing all the various tools in that really cool diagram, I'll even have it like a button you can click so it's kind of obvious, but there's a forum that shows you how to actually make an alert just for that. Can Sysmon detect activities that an EDR cannot? Is it recommended to have both? Oh gosh, yes. I love Sysmon. It's phenomenal. There's another framework out there called Windows Logging Service or System, Windows Logging Service. And that's also pretty darn good. But Sysmon, many EDRs should be able to do everything that Sysmon does, but it does it so freaking well. Now, it's easy for me to say you should have them both. Event ID 10 and 12 can be useful for things like process injection, which a lot of memory resident ransomware variants and malware use to get, you know, the ransomware in the environment will implement, and that's very handy to be able to see all that. Obviously, you have to pay for storage of your Sysmon logs and then also your EDR fees and costs. I don't pay those bills, so it's easy for me to say you should have both. But I would, if you can have both, I totally recommend it. Sysmon is phenomenal. Every different EDR hits different points, you know, where it can do certain things Sysmon can't. I recommend everyone just go to the Sysmon website. Like you can just really just type in Sysmon and scroll down, and there's all the different event codes starting here. Event ID 1, can you see process creations? Every single one of them, right? Can you see file creation time changes? Can you see all network connections from the host? Many EDRs don't actually do this. This is at the host level, TCP and UDP connections. That can be critical for lateral movement in any type of incident, let alone ransomware. So I love Sysmon. With Microsoft 0365 being used a lot of staff choosing not to use VPN due to sessions to help protect staff and organizations alike. Office 365, they have their security bolt-on tiers. I can't recommend more to look into those. Again, I'm not paying the bill, so it's easy for me to say you should get the best security Microsoft offers. Here's an example. If you have an E3 license from Microsoft, there's one thing that you don't get, specifically one thing that you would get in an E5 license, and it's an operation in the audit logs, the universal audit logs, called mail items accessed. If you have an E5, you can see every single email an account touched. If you have an E3, you can't see that. So when I work business email compromise cases, because it's one of the things that consulting firms like us do, right? If the client says, oh, I have an E3 license for everyone, and I say, okay. And then usually, what's the number one thing you want to know when your exchange gets hacked, whether it's part of ransomware or not? What did the threat actor touch? What did they see? What did they have access to? If you have an E3 license, you cannot distinctly answer that question. It's just not possible. There are a lot of things you can look at, but outright, I'm just letting you know, it's not possible. So look into the Microsoft security. Microsoft Online Protection is the last name they use. They keep changing their freaking names for their stuff, but look into the online protection for the Exchange Online. It's awesome. People's benefit, sometimes forensic methods that can be used to recover data, especially backups which haven't been wiped properly. Yes, Nick mentioned wiping data properly. one of the number one things that you're going to need to find out, whether you're doing the work yourself or working with a consultancy or consultant, is what was stolen. Better yet, was anything stolen? And if so, what data went out the door? To identify those, there are ways that you can recover some of that data. It all depends on how long ago it occurred, if the machine's been rebooted, how big the disk is, what type of system it was. Servers write files more often and can therefore rewrite over unused space, things of that nature. But there are ways to recover some of that data. The big thing, though, is to look at things like if anyone's ever taken Forensics 500 here at SANS, if you learned about the log file or the J file, like the USN journal, if those journals are fresh enough and they haven't rolled over, you can see the creation and movement of files all around the disk. And you might see a zip file being created in a particular directory. It might have the name of the directory and it might be the size of that directory. And you might say, they got those files, that kind of thing. Does the attack, and the last question here, does the attacker negotiate in a sense do they accept other payments aside from Bitcoin or other crypto? In the Philippines, not familiar with crypto. Okay. So many ransomware groups are trying to move to Monero, which is another type of Bitcoin, or excuse me, another type of crypto coin, because it's less easy to trace. In fact, it's much more difficult. So you may see some of those are moving to Monero, but right now, crypto / Bitcoin is still a big thing. One of the ways you can deal with that, especially for countries where there's just not as familiar with it, not as much adoption of it, is working with a negotiation firm. Those firms can technically take whatever payments you can get to them. They can deal with all the crypto stuff. So your cyber insurance, if you have cyber insurance, they most likely have a group of consultants like us or others who they'll allow you to use, and they'll probably also have negotiation firms. I would be very weary of your insurance carrier doing your negotiations for you. So if you have insurance X and insurance X says we'll negotiate, I'd try to work that out a different way. I don't like that idea at all. But anyway, yeah, usually the negotiation firms can handle all that. It's very, very scary and a very bad idea, in my opinion, to try to negotiate with any ransomware group by yourself. So if you have a ransomware policy or insurance, cyber insurance, definitely go through them. And if you don't, look up groups like Coveware. Coveware is a really good example of one of the largest negotiation firms out there. I'm not sure how much work they do outside the US, to be honest, but I know they do work around the world in general. So those types of groups can really, really help you out with the crypto payment stuff. Yes, I'm referring to the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Carl, when I mentioned that the actual Defender was picking up a bunch of good stuff in recent cases. And we have some more time. There's 2 more questions here. Let me know. What do you think?
Let's go for it. I know we're going into what they call a virtual time. 2 last questions and we'll wrap it up.
All right, cool. I think my issue is I timed this talk at my normal talking speed. So because I had 15 minutes for Q&A, and then when I slowed down or tried to slow down for the translators, I didn't plan that at all.
Sorry,
Okay.
Ryan, that was you slow? Oh my God. All right.
Exactly. Yeah, that was me trying to go slow the whole time.
Awesome. 2 more, we'll wrap it up.
All right. Can bit files, all zeros or all ones, help to detect and reverse the kind of encryption used? I've not seen that be successful. There are, many times the encryption algorithm that's used is well known, but the actual keys themselves, the private keys, will not be well known, at least to the mass public. I guess the U.S. government knew for a while what Regal was using for a master key, but anyway, yeah, I've not seen that be successful. And usually, if it's like certain groups were using Cha-Cha 20, it's called Cha-Cha. It always makes you want to dance. But it's usually when you see the name of the ransomware variant, typically you can just Google what they use and you'll see what they use. You just won't know the keys. And then if you have a limited budget, security, we just have next-gen AV and EDR to protect endpoint from phishing. I love next-gen AVs. I mean, we produce our own, right? So yeah, I got to be on board. I love them. and EDRs to protect the endpoint. You mentioned, is it secure enough? I'm going to go with no. You still want to train your users. You absolutely still want to train your users. And I still think that for the endpoint, making sure your users are not all administrators, or at least having a mechanism like beyond, I mentioned Beyond Trust a lot because they're just so well known in that landscape, but something where they have to provide maybe like an MFA token to even elevate. Those are phenomenal. Those are fantastic because the malware tries to run and the malware's like, oh man, I'm not an administrator. This sucks. And then oftentimes it'll not do what it is trying to do. And then the final question here, do you know nomoreransom.org? Is it any good? Yes, it is good. In fact, if you go to this page here, when you get the PDF, it's a shortened for my class, but it's just for528.com/sources. And Katie Nichols and I sat down and we did actually a webcast on her SANS star. It was a live stream. It was awesome. She's awesome. And I think we even have it in here. Oh, really? Oh, I'm a filthy liar. I thought we did. Well, yeah, I totally should have had it in there. Yes, that is. I love that site. It's a great site. There's a lot of good information there, but if you do get hit with a bigger, Conti or a bigger group or something like that, it's not gonna be a whole lot of help. I would just caution anyone from uploading the .text file that you typically will get to any website or to any outside entities, because oftentimes they will have things like email addresses that may be specifically given to your organization. And many times they will have like client IDs that will identify you to the ransomware operator. And if you're giving those out by uploading them to websites, you have to be very careful about who has access to that and what they may be doing with that. So just be careful of that. A lot of those services, they'll scan for those kinds of things. They'll say like, oh, Ned33@ProtonMail is the email. We associate that with this ransomware operator, but you don't want to make that stuff public as much as you can. So I would always check with your consulting agency or your cyber insurance before uploading any of your README files for the encrypted stuff. All right, I'll go ahead and cut it right there.
Hey, Ryan, I truly appreciate the time that you've been able to spend with us. But I have just a few questions for you myself.
Yeah, heck yeah.
So number one, you're a class 528, and you're about it's done, right? You have launch dates, you have it all ready to go.
Well played. Yeah, totally. It's coming along. It's coming along.
It's coming along. When do you think we're gonna see it?
The due date is February 1st for all the things, and we're planning our first beta class for March. So I'm hoping. No, forget hoping. We're going to make that.
It is going to happen.
It's going to happen. Yes.
All right. So the follow-up question, and because everyone on here wants to know, when are you going to be able to take that class overseas to Asia Pacific, Singapore, perhaps? Get Suresh is well known for his black pepper crab that he'll potentially try and get you to go out to dinner with him.
As soon as I can. As soon as I can. As I became an instructor for SANS, which you may remember, my first class back in 2019, I was told, until you're certified, be careful teaching too far out of places that you're not familiar with, because you may just say like stupid things, right? And I'm like, no, I want to teach all around the world. I've actually taught virtually in Singapore twice and in Sydney twice as part of my certification courses, and I love it. And every time I'm always like, oh, I wish I was there. So as soon as I can, as soon as the COVID protocols and as soon as the class is out and I'm invited to for example, Singapore, like I'm going, let's do it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think all the attendees on here, if you could send a note saying, hey, we'd really like to see this class over, that might help convince a few of the people on the SANS staff that this is a good idea.
Cool.
Hey, Ryan, without a doubt, your expertise and your passion for this is amazing, and I really appreciate you're on the SANS team and you're willing to do these types of things for us and the community continually. For anyone who doesn't know, Ryan is likely pinged by our SANS media team at least 2 to 3 times a week on ransomware related articles. There's so many people who have questions on this, from the press to organizations and more. just being able to get a SIME, for us in the United States, it's late in the evening. So just being able to do this in an international standpoint, because everyone's affected by it, is incredible. Keep up the great work. I am super proud that you're on our team.
Thank you.
Suresh, any last words from you and the team?
My last words would be, if you sat through this live or recorded or whatever, watch it again and go check out, especially that model, the diagram from Alan, the one with all the different tool names. Every single one of those tools we see all the time. And you might think, this thing's old. This tool is like silly. It looks dumb. I know, but they're so commonly used. Just become familiar with them. Whatever environment you're in, whatever system you're in, take those tool names and hunt for them. Just look for them. Just literally look for process hacker as an example in your environment. It may just be some of your IT people who have it installed, but if it's not, why is it there? And many times they won't even be renamed. It'll be ph2.exe or something like that. So just, I said it's not rocket science, right? It's not difficult once you know what to look for. And I'm hoping that I gave you a lot of stuff to look for. So go look, go check your environment.
Excellent. Thanks for those final words. My name's Rob Lee. I'm with the SANS Institute. And for those of you who really like these type of webcasts, please let the team know, especially Suresh and everyone who is doing all of the translation. Big shout out to putting this webcast on. We'd like to do more of these. So if this is interest, please continue giving feedback to that team. In addition, look for SANS in your local neighborhood. And you see a couple links up here from Scan Secure Japan, Australia, Singapore, and India that are upcoming in the first quarter of 2022. If you have any questions on this or any of the courses, myself or any of the SANS staff would always be happy to help you. Without anything else, I really appreciate you attending tonight. Thanks, Ryan, again. Take it from there. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Folks, there'll just be a brief survey on the language translation. So as you sign off, there'll be, I think, just two very simple questions. Great if you could answer them at the time. Thank you.